Help me get revenge." Those were the last words I ever expected to hear from my grandmother, not because she was weak, not because she couldn't stand up for herself, but because Margaret Mitchell was the strongest person I had ever known. At 78 years old, she was the kind of woman people stood up for when she entered a room. Veterans saluted her. Neighbors brought her pies at Christmas. Local politicians asked her to speak at Memorial Day ceremonies. She had spent 23 years serving as a Navy nurse. She had spent the next 30 helping everyone else, and yet there she was sitting alone in her kitchen crying while my own parents sat in the next room dividing up her life. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy." At the time this happened, I had just finished a training assignment in Virginia that ended 3 days earlier than expected. Instead of waiting around at the base, I decided to drive home to Ohio and surprise Grandma. I hadn't seen her in almost 4 months. We talked on the phone every Sunday, but it wasn't the same. Grandma had practically raised me. After my grandfather died, my parents were always busy working, chasing promotions, worrying about money. Grandma was the one who attended my school plays. Grandma taught me how to ride a bike. Grandma sat beside my hospital bed when I broke my arm at 12. And Grandma was the person who inspired me to join the Navy. I figured she'd be thrilled to see me. I never imagined what I was about to walk into. Hi. The driveway was crowded when I arrived. My father's truck was there, my mother's SUV, my Uncle Ray's old Ford pickup. That was unusual. Nobody had mentioned a family gathering. I parked and walked toward the front porch. As I approached the house, I heard voices coming through an open window. Loud voices, arguing voices. I recognized Uncle Ray immediately. "We should sell the place before winter." My father replied, "That's exactly what I'm saying." I stopped walking. Something about the conversation felt wrong. Then Ray laughed. "We can probably get 400 grand for the house alone." My stomach tightened. The house? What house? Grandma's house. I moved closer. My mother's voice joined in. "And her savings account isn't bad either." I froze. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood. Then my father spoke again. "Once she's in assisted living, she won't need most of it anyway." I felt a flash of anger so sudden it almost made me dizzy. Assisted living. What were they talking about? Grandma was 78, not 98. She still drove herself to church, still volunteered at the Veteran Center, still shoveled her own sidewalk when it snowed. Nobody had mentioned assisted living. Nobody. I pushed open the front door. The voices stopped instantly. 3 startled faces turned toward me. "Sarah," my mother said. "What are you doing here?" I looked at each of them. Nobody smiled. Nobody looked happy to see me. Instead, they looked uncomfortable. "Caught. Training ended early," I said. My father forced a laugh. "Well, that's a surprise." I glanced at the papers spread across the coffee table. Property estimates, financial statements, real estate brochures. None of them belonged there. "Where's Grandma?" I asked. Nobody answered immediately. That told me everything. Finally, my mother pointed toward the kitchen. "She's back there." Oh. I found her sitting at the kitchen table alone. A mug of coffee sat untouched in front of her. The moment I saw her face, my heart broke. Her eyes were red, her shoulders slumped. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically, spiritually, like someone had taken a piece of her. "Grandma," she looked up. For a second, she seemed confused. Then recognition appeared, and she smiled. The kind of smile people give when they're trying not to cry. "Sarah." I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her. The second I did, she broke down. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears. The kind that hurt the most. I held her while anger burned through me. Nobody deserved this, especially not her. After several minutes, she finally pulled away. "I'm sorry," she said. "You have nothing to apologize for." She nodded toward the living room. "They've been here all morning." I already knew who she meant. "What happened?" Grandma stared into her coffee. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she spoke softly. "They think I'm becoming a burden." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A burden. She gave a sad smile. "They say they're worried about me." The words dripped with disappointment. Not bitterness. Disappointment. That somehow felt worse. I walked toward the living room. I was ready to throw every one of them out of the house. Maybe call the police. Maybe call a lawyer. Maybe both. But before I reached the doorway, a hand closed around my wrist. I looked down. Grandma, for such a small woman, her grip was surprisingly firm. "Don't." I stared at her. "Grandma, please." I could see something in her eyes. Not fear, not weakness, something else, something calculating, something I hadn't seen in years. The same look she used to get when telling stories about difficult days in the Navy. The look of someone thinking 3 steps ahead. I sat back down. "What is it?" She glanced toward the living room to make sure nobody was listening. Then she leaned closer. So close I could barely hear her whisper. "They don't know." I frowned. "They don't know what?" A faint smile appeared. The first genuine smile I'd seen all day. Then she whispered the words that would change everything. "Help me get revenge." I stared at her in shock. "Grandma, revenge. The woman who spent her life teaching forgiveness. The woman who volunteered every Christmas morning. The woman who never said a cruel word about anyone." She squeezed my hand. "I don't mean what you think." "Then what do you mean?" She looked toward the ceiling, toward the attic, toward a place I hadn't thought about in years. "There is something up there." "What?" Her eyes met mine. The old military footlocker. I remembered it instantly. An old Navy trunk Grandpa had stored decades ago. Nobody ever opened it. Nobody. Grandma lowered her voice again. "They think they know everything." Her smile grew slightly, "but they forgot who I am." Then she pointed toward the attic stairs. "Help me bring it down." And for the first time that day, I realized my grandmother wasn't defeated, not even close. She was preparing for battle. And whatever was inside that footlocker, my parents and uncle had absolutely no idea it existed. For the next 20 minutes, I played the role of a Navy officer conducting a covert operation inside her own grandmother's house. Not because anyone was dangerous, but because Grandma insisted. "Wait until they're distracted," she whispered. I couldn't help smiling. There was something almost familiar about this version of her. The woman sitting in that kitchen wasn't the fragile elderly widow my parents seemed to see. This was Lieutenant Margaret Mitchell, retired, but not defeated. The opportunity came when my mother announced she was making coffee. A few minutes later, my father and Uncle Ray followed her into the backyard to discuss real estate listings. Grandma nodded toward the hallway. Now I climbed the attic stairs while she waited below. The old house creaked beneath my feet. I hadn't been up there since high school. Dust covered everything. Boxes filled with decades of family history lined the walls. Christmas decorations, old furniture, photo albums. And there, exactly where I remembered it, sat the footlocker. A faded navy blue military trunk. The metal corners were scratched. The lock was worn, but it still looked solid enough to survive another century. I carried it downstairs carefully. When I set it on the kitchen floor, Grandma ran her hand across the lid. For a moment, her expression softened, almost as if she were greeting an old friend. "I haven't opened this in years," she said quietly. Then she reached into her pocket. A small brass key appeared. The lock clicked open. I expected money or legal documents or maybe evidence against my parents. What I found was something completely different. Letters, hundreds of letters, photographs, military records, awards, certificates, newspaper clippings, and memories. An entire lifetime packed into a single trunk. Grandma lifted the first photograph. A young woman in a Navy uniform smiled back at us. Dark hair, confident eyes, perfect posture. I almost didn't recognize her. "You were beautiful." She laughed, past tense. I laughed too for the first time all day. "Still beautiful." Smart answer. We spent the next hour going through the contents. Every item revealed another piece of her life. A Navy Combination Medal, a Meritorious Service Medal, letters from wounded sailors, photographs from military hospitals, thank you notes from families. I picked up one yellowed envelope. The paper felt fragile. The handwriting belonged to a man named James Carter. Inside was a letter dated 42 years earlier. I began reading aloud. "Dear Lieutenant Mitchell," the letter described a young sailor who had been seriously injured overseas. During recovery, he became depressed and nearly gave up hope. According to the letter, Grandma visited him every day, encouraged him, listened to him, refused to let him quit. Years later, he became a teacher, then a principal, then a grandfather. The final sentence made me stop. "If you hadn't believed in me, I wouldn't have survived long enough to meet my grandchildren." I looked up. Grandma shrugged. "He was a good man." I stared at her. Most people would frame a letter like that. She had stuffed it into a box and forgotten about it. The deeper we searched, the more stories emerged. There were dozens of letters, maybe hundreds. Each one told a similar story. Lives changed, families saved, people helped, none of which I'd ever heard before. "Why didn't you tell anyone about this?" She smiled. "Because it wasn't about me." That answer perfectly captured who she was. Then we found another folder. This one contained financial records. I assumed they were ordinary bank statements. They weren't. I started recognizing names. My father, my uncle, several cousins. The amount shocked me. $5,000, $12,000, $20,000, $35,000. Loan after loan, year after year. Most were marked paid by Margaret. Never repaid. Never mentioned. Never discussed. I looked at Grandma. They borrowed all this. She nodded. They needed help. My jaw tightened. "Did they ever pay you back?" A small smile appeared. "You already know the answer." I did. Ah. Suddenly, pieces of my childhood started fitting together. The summer my parents almost lost their house. Grandma helped. The year my uncle's business failed. Grandma helped the medical bills, the car repairs, the college tuition. Grandma helped again and again and again while somehow managing to build a life of her own. The realization made me angry. Not because she had been generous, because they had forgotten. Clear's throat. "Do they know how much you've done for them?" I asked. Grandma considered the question. "At one time, yes," and now she looked toward the living room. "I think people sometimes rewrite history when gratitude becomes inconvenient." The words hit hard because they were true. A few minutes later, she handed me a worn leather journal. "This matters more than the money." I opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten entries spanning decades. Notes about family, lessons from military service, personal reflections. The handwriting remained neat and disciplined throughout. One entry caught my attention. It had been written shortly after my grandfather died. I read silently. "Today I learned that grief and responsibility can occupy the same room. I miss him terribly, but the children still need me, so tomorrow I will get up and continue." I swallowed hard. Grandma had never stopped continuing. Not once. The more we talked, the more I understood why her tears hurt so much. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the money. It was betrayal. She had spent a lifetime sacrificing for others. Now the people she loved most were treating her like an obstacle standing between them and an inheritance. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me all afternoon. "What did you mean when you asked for revenge?" Grandma sat quietly for several moments. Then she folded her hands. "I don't want to hurt them." I waited. "I don't want them humiliated." Another pause. "I don't even want them punished." Now I was confused. "Then what do you want?" Her eyes met mine, the same steady eyes that had guided patients through fear and uncertainty for decades. "The truth. The truth," she nodded. "They've spent years convincing themselves they're good people." Her voice remained calm. "I want them to see what they've become." The kitchen fell silent. Outside, I could hear my father laughing. Uncle Ray was saying something about property taxes. Neither had any idea what was happening inside. Grandma reached into the footlocker one final time. This time she removed a thick sealed envelope. Unlike everything else, it looked recent. Very recent. She placed it in my hands. "What's this?" Her smile returned. A mysterious smile. The kind that immediately made me curious. Something they definitely don't know about. I looked at the envelope, then back at her. For the first time all day, excitement replaced my anger because whatever was inside that envelope, it was important enough for Grandma to keep hidden, and important enough to make her believe the truth could still win. I stared at the sealed envelope for several seconds. It wasn't thick. It wasn't marked confidential. There was nothing dramatic about it, just a plain manila envelope with my grandmother's handwriting across the front for Sarah. Nothing else. No explanation, no warning, no clues. Yet somehow it felt more important than everything else we'd found inside the footlocker. "Open it," Grandma said. I slid a finger beneath the seal. Inside were several documents. At first glance, they looked like ordinary legal papers. Then I started reading and suddenly I understood why Grandma had smiled. The first document belonged to a lawyer in Columbus. The second belonged to an accountant. The third established something called the Margaret Mitchell Veteran Service Foundation. I looked up. "The what?" Grandma folded her hands. "The foundation. You started a foundation 5 years ago." I blinked. 5 years. She nodded. I couldn't believe it. My parents talked to her constantly. My uncle visited every month. How could none of them know? Then again, maybe they hadn't been paying attention. I continued reading. The foundation's purpose was simple: support veterans, provide emergency assistance, fund scholarships for military families, help elderly veterans remain independent in their homes. The organization already existed, legally fully funded, fully operational. I flipped through the paperwork. The numbers nearly made me whistle. Grandma had quietly donated a substantial portion of her assets. Not enough to leave herself struggling, but enough to make a difference for generations. You did all this by yourself? She smiled. I had help. From who? A lot of good people. For several moments I just sat there stunned. My parents thought they were fighting over a fortune. In reality, much of that fortune had already been dedicated to helping others. Not hidden, not secret, simply unnoticed. Because nobody had bothered asking what Grandma cared about. They only cared about what she owned. Then I found another document. This one caught my attention immediately. It was a revised estate plan. Recent. Very recent. Signed only 3 months earlier. I began reading. The house would eventually be sold. The proceeds would support the foundation. Some money would still go to family members. But there was a catch. Actually, several catches. I read them twice to make sure I understood. Then a third time. And finally I laughed. A genuine laugh. The first one I'd had all day. What? Grandma asked. I looked up. This is brilliant. She pretended innocence. I don't know what you mean. You absolutely know what I mean. The conditions weren't cruel. They weren't vindictive. They weren't even particularly difficult. But they revealed exactly who my grandmother was. Anyone receiving money from the estate had to complete community service. They had to participate in veteran support programs. They had to attend financial responsibility workshops. And they had to provide proof. No shortcuts, no exceptions, no excuses. I couldn't stop smiling. This is your revenge. Grandma shook her head. No. Then what is it? A lesson? That answer sounded much more like the woman who raised me. A woman who believed character mattered more than wealth. A woman who spent her life helping people become better versions of themselves. Not because she enjoyed controlling others, because she understood something many people forget. Money amplifies character. If you're generous, money makes you more generous. If you're selfish, money often makes you more selfish. Grandma had seen enough of life to know the difference. We spent another hour reviewing paperwork. The deeper I looked, the clearer the picture became. My grandmother wasn't reacting emotionally. She wasn't scrambling. She wasn't vulnerable. She had planned responsibly. Everything was legal. Everything was organized. Everything was documented. In typical military fashion, she had prepared years in advance. Not for revenge, for stewardship. There was a difference. Then her expression changed. The smile disappeared. The sadness returned. I knew something else was bothering her. What is it? She hesitated. Then she answered. They've been pressuring me. I sat upright. What kind of pressure? Sign this, sign that. Think about your future. Think about what's best. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the hurt underneath, the disappointment, the loneliness. They keep acting like I've already lost the ability to make decisions. That hit me harder than I expected because many older Americans know exactly what that feels like. The moment people stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a problem, a responsibility, a burden, an obstacle. Did they ask directly for money? Grandma laughed softly. Oh yes. How direct? She looked toward the living room. Very. I shook my head. Part of me wanted to march in there and confront all three of them immediately, but another part understood what Grandma was trying to accomplish. She didn't need me to fight. She needed me to witness, to see the truth clearly. As if on cue, voices drifted into the kitchen. My father, Uncle Ray, my mother, they were returning. Grandma quickly gathered the documents. Not because she was hiding them, because she wasn't ready yet. The time would come, but not today. A few minutes later, everyone sat around the dining room table. The atmosphere felt strange, artificial, like a family pretending everything was normal. My mother asked about my training assignment. Uncle Ray complained about gas prices. Dad talked about local politics. Meanwhile, nobody mentioned the paperwork scattered throughout the living room. Nobody mentioned assisted living. Nobody mentioned inheritance. The dishonesty was exhausting. Then my father turned toward Grandma. "We've been thinking." The words immediately put me on alert. Grandma remained calm. "Oh," he smiled, a salesman smile, one I'd seen before. "We found a really nice retirement facility." Grandma took a sip of coffee. "Did you?" My mother jumped in. "They have activities and transportation and medical support." Uncle Ray nodded enthusiastically. "It would be perfect." I watched Grandma carefully. Her expression never changed. Years of military discipline hid whatever she was feeling. Then Dad pulled a folder from his briefcase. There it was. The real reason for the visit. Paperwork. He slid it across the table. "If you sign these, we can start making arrangements." The room became very quiet. I looked down. Property transfer forms. Exactly what I expected. My pulse quickened. I wanted to intervene. Grandma gently touched my arm beneath the table. A silent message. Not yet. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not warmly, not coldly, just knowingly, almost as if she were watching a movie whose ending she already knew. She pushed the folder back toward my father. "Not today." His smile faded. "Mom, not today." The firmness in her voice surprised everyone, including me. For the first time all afternoon, my father looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. That evening, after everyone left, Grandma stood beside the front window, watching their vehicles disappear down the street. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she turned toward me. "I think it's time." "Time for what?" Her eyes sparkled. Not with anger, with certainty. "The family meeting?" I frowned. "What family meeting?" The smile returned. "The one they're never going to forget." And suddenly, I realized my grandmother wasn't planning revenge at all. She was preparing a reckoning. One built entirely on truth. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed in Ohio. Officially, I was using accumulated leave before returning to my next assignment. Unofficially, I was helping my grandmother prepare for what she called the family meeting. At first, I assumed she meant a gathering around the dining room table, a difficult conversation, an intervention, a confrontation, something like that. I was wrong. Grandma had something much bigger in mind and far more effective. The planning began the very next morning. We sat at her kitchen table with coffee and legal pads, the same table where I had found her crying. The difference was remarkable. The sadness hadn't disappeared completely. But now there was purpose, direction, strength. The woman I remembered was returning, not because her pain was gone, because she had decided what to do with it. Who should be there? I asked. Grandma thought carefully. People who know the truth. That answer sounded simple. It wasn't. Over the next hour, she created a list. Retired veterans, former patients, neighbors, church members, community volunteers, people whose lives she had touched over the years. The names filled several pages. I was amazed. At 78 years old, she had built relationships throughout the entire county. Not powerful relationships, meaningful ones. There was a difference. One name caught my attention. Harold Benson. I recognized it immediately. Colonel Benson. Grandma nodded. Retired now. I stared at her. The man had commanded thousands of troops during his career. What does he have to do with this? She smiled. I helped save his life once. I wasn't even surprised anymore. Every day seemed to reveal another story, another person, another life she'd quietly changed. Ma. As the days passed, calls were made. Invitations extended. No details were shared. Only that Margaret Mitchell would appreciate their presence at a family gathering. The response amazed me. Almost everyone said yes immediately. No hesitation, no questions, just yes. That alone told me everything. People respected her deeply. So meanwhile, my parents and Uncle Ray continued their campaign. Phone calls increased. Visits became more frequent. Suggestions became pressure. Pressure became frustration. The more Grandma delayed signing documents, the more impatient they became. Fortunately, she had prepared me. Observe, she kept saying. Don't argue. So, I observed. One afternoon, I sat quietly in the living room while my father tried once again. Mom, we're only thinking about your future. Grandma nodded politely. I know you need support. I understand. You shouldn't be handling everything alone. Again, she nodded. Then, she asked a simple question. If you're worried about me, When was the last time you asked what I wanted? The room became silent, painfully silent. My father opened his mouth, then closed it because he didn't have an answer. Another day, Uncle Ray arrived carrying brochures, luxury retirement communities, independent living facilities, assisted care centers. He spent nearly 40 minutes discussing amenities, swimming pools, restaurants, transportation, activities. Finally, Grandma interrupted him. "Ray, what have you visited me even once this year without wanting something?" The question landed like a hammer. His face turned red. He couldn't answer either. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Not because anyone was exposing it, because it exposed itself. People reveal themselves eventually, especially when money enters the conversation. The family meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after I found Grandma crying. The location surprised everyone. Instead of her house, she rented the community hall attached to the local veteran center, a modest building. Nothing fancy, but meaningful. Very meaningful. For decades, she had volunteered there. Many veterans considered her family. The day arrived. I arrived early to help with setup. Rows of chairs filled the hall. Coffee stations lined one wall. Photographs stood on display tables. Many came from the Foot Locker. Military photographs. Volunteer photographs. Community events. Years of service captured in images. Looking around, I realized something. This wasn't a trial. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about inheritance anymore. It was about remembering. Guests began arriving shortly after noon. Then more. Then even more. By 1:00, the room was nearly full. Veterans in caps and service jackets, neighbors, friends, former co-workers, church members, people from every chapter of Grandma's life. The crowd stunned me. I knew she was respected. I hadn't realized how much. Then my parents arrived, followed by Uncle Ray. The confusion on their faces was immediate. My mother looked around the crowded room. "What is this?" Nobody answered. Not yet. Dad spotted several local community leaders. His expression changed. Now he looked nervous. Good. Maybe for the first time he realized this wasn't going to be another private conversation. At precisely 1:30, Grandma stepped to the front of the room. The conversation stopped instantly. Not gradually. Instantly. That's the kind of respect she commanded. I felt proud just watching her. Straight posture, calm expression, quiet confidence. A retired Navy nurse standing before a room full of people whose lives she had touched. "Thank you for coming," she began. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room listened. Every word mattered. She welcomed everyone, thanked them. Then she invited several guests to speak. What followed changed everything. The first speaker was a veteran named Frank. He described meeting Grandma after returning home struggling with depression. She helped him find counseling. She checked on him regularly. She refused to give up on him. "Quite honestly," he said, "I don't know if I'd still be here without Margaret." The room grew quiet. My father looked down. Then came a widow whose husband had served in Vietnam. Grandma had helped her navigate benefits paperwork after his death for nearly a year without charging a penny, without seeking recognition, without telling anyone. The woman cried while speaking. Several audience members cried with her. Story after story followed. A former patient, a single mother, a disabled veteran, a struggling family. Each person shared a memory, a kindness, a sacrifice, a moment when Margaret Mitchell had shown up when nobody else did. By the 5th story, my mother's eyes were wet. By the 7th, Uncle Ray couldn't look anyone in the eye. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the front carrying a folder, the same folder we had assembled from the Foot Locker. Financial records, loan documents, receipts, history, truth. I looked directly at my parents, then at my uncle. My voice remained calm, professional, measured. Years in the Navy had taught me discipline. Many people here know what Grandma has done for this community. I paused, but very few know what she's done for her family. The room became still, very still. I opened the folder and began reading. The first loan, the second, the third, the emergency bills she paid, the mortgages she helped save, the businesses she rescued, the tuition she funded, one example after another, year after year, decade after decade. No judgment, just facts. Nothing but facts. And with every page I read, My parents seemed to shrink a little further into their chairs because for the first time in their lives, they were being forced to see the complete picture, not the version they preferred, the truth. And when I finally reached the last page, Grandma slowly rose to her feet. The room turned toward her. She looked at my parents, then at Uncle Ray, and finally, she said 6 words that made the entire room hold its breath. "I've changed my estate plans. I've changed my estate plans." The room became so quiet that I could hear the old air conditioner humming near the back wall. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My father stared at Grandma. My mother looked confused. Uncle Ray's face went pale. For a brief moment, I thought one of them might object. Instead, they simply sat there waiting, just like everyone else, waiting to hear what would come next. Grandma stood calmly at the front of the room. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. In fact, she looked surprisingly peaceful. That was the first thing I noticed. The woman who had been crying at her kitchen table 3 weeks earlier seemed completely different. Not because her pain had disappeared, because she had decided to face it. And there is a kind of strength that comes from that decision. A quiet strength, a permanent strength, the kind no one can take away. She looked around the room at the veterans, at her neighbors, at her friends, then finally at her children. "My house will eventually be sold." Nobody reacted. That part wasn't surprising. "My savings and remaining assets will be distributed according to the new estate plan." Still no reaction. Then she continued, "The majority of my estate will support the Margaret Mitchell Veterans Service Foundation." A few murmurs spread through the crowd. My father blinked. "What foundation?" The question escaped before he could stop himself. Grandma turned toward him. "The one I established 5 years ago." The expression on his face was unforgettable. Shock. Pure shock. He looked at my mother. My mother looked at Uncle Ray. Neither knew what she was talking about because neither had ever asked. Grandma continued. "The foundation will provide scholarships, emergency assistance, and housing support for veterans and military families." Several veterans nodded approvingly. One elderly man quietly wiped his eyes. The room understood exactly what this meant. Margaret Mitchell's service wasn't ending. It was continuing long after she was gone. Then came the part that changed everything. Family members may still receive part of the estate. Relief immediately appeared on my father's face. Then Grandma finished the sentence, but only after meeting certain conditions. The relief vanished. My attorney stood and distributed copies of the estate documents. People began reading slowly, carefully. The conditions were exactly as I remembered. Community service, volunteer work, veteran support programs, financial responsibility courses, proof of completion, real participation, not symbolic gestures, not signatures on paper, actual effort, actual service, actual growth. My father looked up first. "You're serious?" Grandma smiled gently. "Very." My mother spoke next. "Why would you do this?" The answer came immediately. "Because money without character is dangerous." Nobody argued. Nobody could. For the first time all afternoon, Uncle Ray stood. He looked uncomfortable, almost vulnerable. "I don't understand." Grandma nodded. "I know." His voice softened. "Do you think we're bad people?" The question surprised everyone, especially me, because it sounded honest, not defensive. Not angry, honest. Grandma thought for several seconds before answering. "No." The room remained silent. "No, Ray. I don't think you're bad people." "Then why?" Her eyes moved slowly across the room toward all 3 of them. "You forgot what matters. That was it. Not greed, not evil, not cruelty." For years, they had simply drifted. They had become focused on possessions, problems, bills, inheritance, the practical details of life. And somewhere along the way, they forgot gratitude, forgot perspective, forgot people. Then Grandma said something I'll never forget. "The saddest thing isn't that you wanted my money." She paused. "The saddest thing is that none of you asked whether I was happy." Nobody looked at her. Not one of them. Because they knew she was right. Several people in the audience lowered their heads. A few quietly nodded. Not because they were judging my family, because they recognized the truth. Many families experience some version of it. People get busy. Life gets complicated. Good intentions fade. Relationships become transactions. And sometimes nobody notices until damage has already been done. Then something unexpected happened. My mother started crying. Not dramatic tears, not attention-seeking tears. Real tears. The kind that arrive when a person finally sees themselves clearly. She covered her mouth, shook her head, and whispered 3 words. "I'm sorry, Mom." The room remained silent. Grandma didn't rush to comfort her. She didn't rush to forgive her either. Instead, she allowed the moment to exist. Allowed the truth to breathe. A few seconds later, my father stood. I had never seen him look so defeated. Not after losing jobs. Not after financial struggles. Not after difficult years. This was different. This wasn't failure. This was shame. And shame is harder because it comes from within. I thought we were helping. The word sounded weak even to him. Grandma nodded. "I believe part of you thought that." The honesty of her response stunned me. She wasn't trying to destroy him. She wasn't rewriting history. She was acknowledging complexity. Human beings are rarely entirely selfish or entirely selfless. Usually, we're both at the same time. My father looked down, then slowly sat back in his chair. For the first time that day, he stopped defending himself, stopped explaining, stopped justifying, and simply listened. The meeting continued for nearly another hour. People shared memories. Questions were answered. Legal details were explained. But the atmosphere had changed completely. The inheritance was no longer the focus. Character was legacy was. Service was the things Grandma cared about most. Eventually, the crowd began leaving. Veterans shook her hand. Neighbors hugged her. Friends thanked her. One by one, they departed until only family remained. Just the 5 of us. The hall suddenly felt much larger, much quieter. Nobody spoke for several moments. Then, Uncle Ray finally broke the silence. "I owe you an apology," Grandma nodded. Yes, it was such a simple response, yet somehow perfect. Not cruel, not dramatic, just honest. My mother moved first. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around Grandma. Both women cried. Years of misunderstandings, years of assumptions, years of distance, not erased, but finally acknowledged. My father joined them a moment later. Then Uncle Ray. Soon all 4 stood together, a broken family trying to find its way back. Not fixed, not healed, but moving in the right direction. As I watched Grandma glance toward me, a small smile appeared. The same smile she wore the day she asked for revenge. And suddenly, I understood. This had never been revenge. Not really. There were no winners, no losers, no destruction, no humiliation, just truth. Truth delivered with enough courage to change people. And perhaps that was the most powerful kind of revenge imaginable, because instead of ruining her family, Grandma had forced them to confront themselves, and that was something none of them would ever forget. The months that followed surprised me, not because everything suddenly became perfect. It didn't. Real life rarely works that way. People don't transform overnight. Families don't heal in a single conversation. Trust doesn't magically rebuild itself because someone says the right words. The damage had been real, the hurt had been real, and everyone knew it. But for the first time in a long time, something important had changed. We were finally being honest. I returned to active duty a few weeks after the family meeting. My next assignment took me back to Virginia. Life became busy again. Training schedules, administrative work, long days, early mornings, the usual rhythm of military life. But I spoke with Grandma nearly every evening, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour. Those conversations became the highlight of my day. These started slowly, so slowly that I almost missed them. One Saturday afternoon, my father called. That alone was unusual. We had always cared about each other, but we weren't particularly close. Not the way Grandma and I were. "Guess where I am?" he asked. "No idea." "The Veterans Center." I nearly dropped my phone. "The Veterans Center." "Yeah." I waited. I started volunteering. For several seconds, I didn't know what to say. Then I smiled. "How's that going?" he laughed. Humbling. A few weeks later, Grandma told me something else. My mother had begun delivering meals to elderly residents in town. Every Tuesday, without fail. Not because anyone forced her. Not because it was required by the estate plan, because she wanted to. At first, I assumed she was trying to impress Grandma. But months passed, and she kept doing it quietly, consistently, the same way Grandma always had. Even Uncle Ray changed. Though in typical Uncle Ray fashion, he complained about it constantly. According to Grandma, he spent every volunteer shift grumbling, every community project grumbling, every veterans fundraiser grumbling. Yet somehow he never missed one. That clears throat made me laugh. Some people improve dramatically. Others improve while complaining the entire time. Both count. As the seasons changed, I noticed something else. Grandma smiled more. Not because she forgot what happened, she never did. But the weight she carried seemed lighter. The bitterness she feared had never taken root. That mattered. Because bitterness has a way of damaging the person carrying it. Grandma understood that better than anyone. The following spring, her health began to decline. Nothing dramatic at first, just small things. Less energy, more doctor's appointments, longer naps, a slower pace. She remained independent, still stubborn, still sharp, still capable of winning any argument she chose to enter. But age was finally beginning to catch up with her. Whenever I had leave, I flew home. Sometimes for a weekend, sometimes longer. Those visits became precious because deep down both of us understood what was happening. We simply didn't say it out loud. One evening, nearly a year after the family meeting, we sat together on her front porch, the same porch where she used to drink coffee every morning. The sun was setting, the neighborhood was quiet, a warm summer breeze moved through the trees. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. We simply watched the evening settle across the town she loved. Then Grandma broke the silence. "Do you remember what I asked you that day?" I smiled. "Help me get revenge." She laughed softly. "That wasn't my finest choice of words." "No, it got your attention, though." "It definitely got my attention." For a while she stared at the sunset. Then her expression became thoughtful. "Sarah, yes. I need you to remember something." Whenever Grandma used that tone, I listened carefully because important lessons usually followed. "Huh? People will disappoint you." I nodded. That wasn't exactly breaking news. Life had already taught me that. Sometimes they'll betray you. Another truth, a painful one. But that's not the important part. I waited. She turned toward me. Those familiar blue eyes remained as steady as ever. "The important part is what you do afterward." I didn't say anything. I wanted to hear every word. You can become angry. You can become cynical. You can spend the rest of your life trying to hurt people who hurt you." She paused. "Many people do." The evening breeze rustled the trees. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Everything felt strangely peaceful. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand, the same way she had done on the day I found her crying. Only now there were no tears, no fear, no pain, just wisdom. "Don't become like them." The words landed gently, but powerfully, even when people deserve it. I asked. She smiled. "Especially then." I thought about my parents, about Uncle Ray, about the family meeting, about all the anger I had carried that day. And suddenly I understood what she meant. Justice mattered. Truth mattered. Accountability mattered. But becoming cruel in pursuit of those things came with a cost. A very high cost. One Grandma had refused to pay. "Character," she said quietly, "is what you choose when you're hurt." I knew immediately that I would remember that sentence for the rest of my life. 3 months later, Margaret Mitchell passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 79 years old. Her funeral filled the church. Veterans, neighbors, friends, community leaders, former patients, military families, people from every chapter of her remarkable life. Some traveled hundreds of miles to attend. Others stood outside because there wasn't enough room inside. I had never seen anything like it. During the service, story after story was shared. Stories of kindness, stories of sacrifice, stories of courage, stories of service. And as I listened, I realized something. The greatest thing Grandma left behind wasn't her house. It wasn't her savings. It wasn't even the foundation. It was the example she set. A life built on dignity, responsibility, compassion, and grace. Today, the foundation continues its work. My father still volunteers. My mother still delivers meals. Uncle Ray still complains and still shows up. The family isn't perfect, never will be. But we're better than we were, because one extraordinary woman refused to answer betrayal with hatred. If there's one lesson I carried from my grandmother's life, it's this. You cannot control how people treat you. You cannot control their choices. You cannot control their failures. But you can control who you become because of them. And sometimes the strongest victory isn't making people suffer. It's refusing to lose your character while seeking justice. If Margaret Mitchell's story touched you, take a moment to think about someone who shaped your life through kindness, sacrifice, or quiet strength. Maybe give them a call. Maybe thank them while you still can. And if this story reminded you of someone special, feel free to share it with others who might appreciate its message. Thank you for spending this time with me, and thank you for helping keep stories like my grandmother's